Okay, so I've been showing you how to use essentially box modelling or polygonal modelling to begin a model, but I'm going to show you another way. Still with the, I might continue with the file I want to create a new scene. The file I did last week, so I'll go to open that. Yep. Okay, so I've got there a model which I made just using box as a starting point, and then I've deformed that. But then you can see underneath I've got this shape that I've traced. I'm just going to zoom out so you can see. My shortcuts aren't working. Okay, so I've made that shape by tracing in plan and then extruding it. And you can create any shape that way in 3ds Max. So I'm just going to make some shapes in the interior there. And so you can see there on the Create panel, you have the sphere selected, which is geometry, and then next to that you've got the Shapes button. So the Geometry panel gives you things like boxes, spheres, cylinders, all those 3D pieces of geometry. And then if you're looking at the drop-down list there, all of these other options basically are for, again, 3D geometry. But then the second panel has shapes, which give you essentially 2D geometry. You see what I'm saying? Essentially, because it's not always 2D. You can make most of these things 3D as well, but you'll see in a moment that they're all based on lines or something similar. So the easiest way to start drawing these is just with the line tool. So I'm just going to zoom in there so I can see an area that's going to be visible in the camera views. And so with lines, you've got some options down below. Corner for the initial type is the option I'm going to leave there. But then for drag type, I'll leave it on corner to begin with. I'm just going to click a few points. And you can see then, even if I click and drag, it's just going to give me angular joints between those vertices. So that's okay if you want to make a rectilinear or a straight edge shape. So I can extrude that now, and you can see it there in the camera view. But if you want to make something that's curved, then that's often why you would use the line tool as a starting point instead of starting with a box. You can try setting the drag top to one of these other options, either smooth or Bezier. And Bezier is one of those terms that pops up a lot with these sorts of programs, anything that uses graphics, because they're a standard way of dealing with curves. So I'm going to click a start point again, and this time when I click the second point, I'm going to drag afterwards, and that will give me a curve automatically. So there we go. So you can see it's on drag type, which means you need to click and drag to get that option. So again, clicking and dragging, and just continuing like that. Okay, so you can see how much easier it is to make a spline shape already than in a program, say, like Revit or even AutoCAD, actually. So I'm going to click on my start point to finish that. And normally when you get the option here to close spline, you say yes to make a closed shape, which will extrude better than an open shape. So to see those handles, I'm just going to maximize that viewport, right click, and go to the Modify tab. And you'll see then that lines, or splines generally, have similar options to the editable polys that we've been looking at. You have vertex, segment and spline instead of vertex, edge, polygon and so on. So with vertex selected, I'm going to choose one of these vertices, and you can see that we have handles. So those handles determine the direction of the curve and its strength. So the length of the handle is the strength of the curve, and then the angle gives the direction. If you're wondering, you can unlock them. I'm going to leave it smooth for now, so I'm going to keep the handles locked, essentially. So it's a much easier way of controlling curves than, because even AutoCAD. AutoCAD does have good options for splines, but not as powerful as this. They don't even have to be flat, so you can, if you go into a side view, I'm just going to change this to a front view, and go to wireframe, you can lift them up off the ground. So that's a 3D spline. And again, in Revit you need to use a special tool for that, and it has its own limitations as well. But in 3ds Max, all splines are automatically 3D splines. So that gives you a lot of options if you need to make twisting shapes that are going through your space. I'll show you a good option for that in a minute. So people often ask about that because it's a common thing now in design to see these kind of twisting, looping forms that wind through a space that are fairly decorative, but you need to model still and show in 3D. And people think that because they're seeing them in these completed spaces, that they've got to make them in their full 3D shape in a CAD program like Revit, when really people who are designing those things generally don't make them that way. They'll make them, if at all, using a computer program, using a 3D program like this, and then just show them in plan and section in a program like Revit or AutoCAD, using 2D equivalents to just indicate where they go roughly in the plan or the section. So it's common to say people make think you've got to do it all in Revit, when really those tools aren't designed to do everything. So I've got my shape there, and now I can extrude that. So I've gone to the Modifier tab, and in the Modifier list I can choose Extrude, give it a height, and remember, just like anything else in that modifier stack, you can go down in the list there to the original parts of it, and I can still go back and modify that shape. I'll show you a good option here. When you're working with the stack, you've got an option to show the end result, which is the second button under the stack there, and that way you can see the 3D finished product that you'll end up with the modifier even while you're working on the line underneath. So you can see there this extruded shape changing. And just to show you something different, I'll lift that up off the ground, and you can see that will change the top of it as well. So a lot of flexibility there when you're modelling with splines as a starting point. And remember, you can always convert those into editable polys. So I can right click, convert to editable poly, and then go further using just the faces that it's created for me. So that's one approach. Draw a closed spline, and you can easily edit that. So maybe I'll just show you a few more examples using that approach with the line tool. Let's maximise this. I might want some rooms in this area. So just like in AutoCAD, you can draw lines, and to make them go at a right angle, you don't use ortho, you hold down shift to make it snap to right angles. So I can draw a basic layout for some walls there. And now if I go to modify and then again go to one of those sub-object modes, like this time I'll go to spline, can see then you have a lot of the same options that that AutoCAD gives you. So trim, extend, mirror are all the same as the drawing tools you have in AutoCAD. So I can go in, for example, to segment, or even actually with spline, still go to create line, and I'll just add a few new lines over here. That'll do it roughly. Okay, so I've got these lines that are now crossing over the others, and I can use trim. It's actually easier than AutoCAD because you don't even need to choose edges. Automatically it'll cut back, and it's just like AutoCAD. So the better you are with AutoCAD, the easier this will be. There, the line didn't quite work properly, so I can just go and select those vertices, and if you right click you can change the corner option, and I'll change this one to corner, which will take the curve away, and then I can just stretch that down. Okay, for things like walls, that's a really good approach, just drawing shapes the way you do in AutoCAD. And again, that can just be extruded. So the final thing I want to show you is how you get those twisting shapes that often are more sculptural or based on ribbons or some idea like that. So again, using the line tool, I'll maximise this viewport, and I'm just going to draw, maybe coming out from the wall here, clicking and dragging to make it curve. Now, I'm not really happy with that curve, so I'm going to go to Modify and Vertex and just adjust some of those points. I want to be a little bit more free-flowing. Okay, that might do. So now, in a side view, in the front view maybe, I'm going to lift those points up. So back to Vertex, start with the last point. I'm going to drag it up in the side view, there in the front view, going to the next point, lifting it up. And notice I can see those points pretty clearly in the camera now. So people often try to design these things without the skills to be able to make them, and if you haven't got the skills to make these things, then you can't design them. You can't just expect to pay someone else who knows how to do it, because they'll want to do their own designs. You can't just, a lot of people just think they can see something in a magazine and think, well, I want to design that and I'll pay someone else to go and make it for me. When in reality, they'll want to do their own designs. If they've got the skills to do that, they'll be designing it themselves, or designing their own things. So you've got to have the skills to create all the things you want to design. So notice in the camera view there, I can see that ribbon type shape that I want. So just so it's clear, I'll maximise that. So there it is, you can see it coming through the view there. And again, unlike Revit, I can keep adjusting that in the camera view. There's no restriction on working in camera views in 3ds Max. Okay, so there it is. And so I've been showing you that you can extrude these things, and I could extrude that. Okay, just to show you, even though it's an open shape, there's no limitation on using the extrude tool with it. So that's one way of making a ribbon out of it. I'm going to show you an even better way. In the line properties, you've got the option under rendering to tick enable in render and enable in viewport. And then you can set a thickness to give you a curve, or you can make it rectangular and give a dimension in each direction. Okay, so that's an easy way of making 3D shapes, and this is often better than using Extrude because it's still all done just with a line. So has anyone tried to do something like that in Revit? I know last year people did, yeah. So it's a good thing to try. You can do it in Revit using the massing tools. You can do it. I've seen people do a pretty good job of it actually, but it's a lot of work. In Max it's much more freeform. And so if you're worried about these segments that have come in, don't be worried. That's an easy option to adjust in interpolation there. It's going to set it to adaptive, which is an easy way of getting that to go a bit smoother. Or you can increase the segments as well. That's another way. Okay, so anyhow, that's all I wanted to show you, how you can start with splines. Xavier earlier was mentioning curtains and things like that. Maybe just to make it easy to relate to, I will show you, because they're a really good thing to know about as well. If you want to make a curtain, really easy using those techniques I've just shown you. Click, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. Now notice it's still got my box settings, my rectangular settings, but I can just turn those off here. And if I go to Vertex, that's got those points maybe a little bit far apart, so they can easily be brought together. And the whole thing can be scaled. Oops. Sorry, going out of there. And of course I can go back and fine tune those curves. Some of them are a little bit jagged. Okay, so there's my curtain type shape, and I might just scale the whole thing down now because it's a little bit big. So just make sure you can see it there in the 3D view in the camera. And so again, that can just be extruded, even though it's an open shape, not a problem. Oops, stretch that up. Now it maybe has too many segments there, so I'm going to take those steps back down. Don't need that many. Something like this. And I'll isolate it so I can see it in another view. And so again, because it's still got the line under the extrude, you can go back to Vertex and lift some of those points off the ground. And just keep adjusting them. Now, you might realise that's just going straight up, and if you want it to be more free-flowing than that, you can maybe add in some more segments. And think about either converting it to an editable poly, and then you can adjust the points individually, or try modifiers. So sometimes using modifiers like bend, or that one you used earlier, FFD, is a good one. So FFD 3x3x3 here should be pretty good. And instead of collapsing it all into an editable poly, sometimes that's a better option, and you can adjust individual points. which is good enough. And again, it's only a 0 thickness at the moment, but again, without converting that into an editable poly, another option would be to again use one of those modifiers that you looked at earlier, like shell, if you wanted to give it a thickness. Fabric wouldn't need to be very thick anyway, but if you do need to have something like that with a thickness, that's often your way. Okay, so there you are, very simple curtain, but I'm sure you get the idea. There's lots of things you can do with those modelling tools. Alright, so I'll leave it at that, but that should give you enough, along with the Boolean tools. Don't forget about those, and we'll maybe spend a bit more time on that next week, but otherwise you should have more than enough to get started